My grandfather's lawyer was reading the will out loud when my brother slid a folder across the conference table and told me to sign before the end of the day. He didn't ask. He said it like it was already decided, like I was just a formality. I looked at the folder. I looked at him, and then I smiled and said, "Of course. Let me just read through it first." He didn't like that. But before I tell you what was in that folder and what I had already done 3 days before that meeting, drop a comment and tell me what is one thing someone in your family did that you pretended not to notice, even though you saw everything. I want to read your answers. My grandfather built his house with his own hands, not metaphorically, literally. He poured the concrete for the foundation himself in 1974 with two friends and a wheelbarrow. He told me that story so many times I could recite it like a bedtime prayer. The cracked step on the back porch, the slightly uneven kitchen floor he never fixed because he said perfect houses are for people who don't actually live in them. I spent every summer in that house from the time I was 6 years old. My brother, he is 4 years older than me, spent exactly two. Then he discovered that summer camps had jet skis and girls, and Grandpa's farmhouse in rural Ohio had neither. So I became the one who stayed. I learned how to change a tire in that driveway. I learned how to make proper cornbread, not the sweet kind that comes from a box. I sat on that back porch with my grandfather every evening for 20 summers and listened to him talk about everything: the land, the neighbor's dogs, the way the light changed over the fields in August. He was not a sentimental man in the conventional sense. He didn't hug easily. He didn't say, "I love you," unless he really meant it. But he showed up. Every single time. For me, he showed up. My brother showed up when Grandpa got diagnosed. Kidney disease, stage 3, progressing. Suddenly, my brother remembered where our grandfather lived. Suddenly, he had opinions about medical care and end-of-life planning and, very specifically, the estimated value of a farmhouse sitting on 11 acres of land that a developer had been quietly circling for 2 years. I was the one managing Grandpa's medications. I was the one driving him to dialysis 3 times a week, 4 hours round trip. I took on remote work so I could be flexible. I watched my grandfather shrink slowly from the man who poured concrete to a man who needed help getting up from his chair. I did not resent it, not even once. I want to be clear about that. I didn't stay because I expected anything. I stayed because I loved him and because that is what you do for the people who showed up for you. My brother called every other Sunday. He sent a flower arrangement at Christmas that was clearly ordered online in under 4 minutes. When Grandpa finally passed, it was a Thursday morning in March. I was holding his hand. My brother drove in Friday afternoon and immediately asked when the lawyer meeting was scheduled. Grandpa had worked with the same attorney for 30 years, a careful, deliberate man named Mr. Aldrich who wore reading glasses on a chain and spoke like every word was being invoiced. The meeting was set for the following Tuesday at his office. My brother arrived in a rental car with his wife, Becca, who I had met maybe 6 times total in 8 years of their marriage. She wore a blazer to the funeral and called Grandpa your grandfather every time she referenced him, even when speaking to my brother. Never Grandpa. Never anything with warmth in it. That Sunday, 2 days before the meeting, my brother invited me to dinner. "Just the two of us," he said, "to catch up, to process everything. I want to tell you something about how I grew up." I was not naive. I knew, even as a child, that my brother and I operated on different frequencies. He was charming in the way that people who want things from you are charming. Smooth when he needed something, absent when he didn't. I had cataloged these patterns for years the way you catalog weather. Not with bitterness, just with accuracy. You learn to dress for the forecast. So when he called that dinner, just the two of us to catch up, I brought a small digital recorder in my purse and set it to record before I walked into the restaurant. I'm not going to pretend I felt clever doing it. I felt sad. There is a particular grief in loving someone who has taught you that you cannot trust them and still wanting, somewhere small and stubborn, to be wrong. Over dinner, he was warm. He told a story about Grandpa that made me laugh. He ordered a good bottle of wine and poured my glass generously. Then, with the careful casualness of someone who had rehearsed it, he said he'd been in touch with Mr. Aldrich's office. "Just to prepare," he said, "just to make sure everything went smoothly." He mentioned that Grandpa had updated the will about 18 months ago. He mentioned it in the tone of someone who already knew exactly what it said. I said, "Oh, really? I didn't know that." He nodded. He said Grandpa had divided the estate evenly: house, land, savings. 50-50. He said it gently, like he was managing my expectations. I said, that sounds like him. I watched his shoulders drop slightly. He topped off my wine. What he didn't say, over that dinner, was anything about the document he was already preparing. What he didn't say was that he had found someone willing to notarize a signature that would consolidate the estate into a single trustee, him, with full authority to manage and liquidate assets. He didn't say that the document included, buried in paragraph 9 of a 12-paragraph agreement, a clause that transferred my claim on the property in exchange for a one-time payment of $30,000. A buyout dressed up in legal language and handed to me with a pen. He didn't say any of that over dinner. He told me to sign it at the Tuesday meeting in front of Mr. Aldrich, like it was a routine step. Here is what he did not know. 2 weeks before Grandpa passed, on one of his better mornings, we sat on the back porch with coffee. He was tired but clear. He held his mug with both hands and looked out at the field and said, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without crying. I said, I can't promise that. He almost smiled. He told me that he had spoken with Mr. Aldrich. He told me that he had spoken with Mr. Aldrich. He told me that he had changed the will, not evenly, not 50-50. The house and the land were going to me. The savings would be split. He said he knew what he was doing and he had thought about it for a long time. He said, you were the one here. That should mean something. I cried. I promised him I wouldn't, and I cried anyway. He patted my hand once, which from him was enormous. He also told me something else. He said my brother had called him 3 months earlier asking questions about the estate. Specific questions. Grandpa said he had played along because he wanted to see how far it would go. He said, I've known that boy his whole life. I know when he's angling. He asked me to get a copy of the will directly from Mr. Aldrich's office, just for myself, just to have it. He asked me not to tell my brother. I went to Mr. Aldrich's office the following week with a notarized letter of authorization that Grandpa had signed. I sat in the waiting room with its wood-paneled walls and its smell of old paper, and I held a certified copy of the will in my hands, and I read every word of it twice. So when my brother slid that folder across the conference table and told me to sign before the end of the day, I already knew exactly what it contained. The folder was maybe a 1/4 inch thick, cream-colored paper, heavy stock, the kind designed to look trustworthy. My brother had his hands flat on the table. His wife was studying the far wall. Mr. Aldrich was quiet, which I found interesting. I opened it slowly. I read it the way you read something you're reading for show. Slowly enough to seem careful. Steadily enough to seem careful. Steadily enough to stay calm. My brother sat back in his chair. He was relaxed. He thought this part was already over. Paragraph 9 was exactly where I expected it to be. I looked up at my brother. I said, this transfers my interest in the property. He nodded. He said it was just a procedural consolidation. He said it would simplify management of the estate. He said $30,000 was a fair assessment given current market conditions and he had spoken with a realtor. I said, which realtor? He named someone I didn't know. I said, because the developer who's been approaching this property for 2 years offered significantly more than $30,000 just for the right of first refusal. So I'm curious what methodology your realtor used. The temperature in that room changed. It didn't drop dramatically. It just went still the way air goes still right before something falls. My brother's jaw moved slightly. He said, how do you know about the developer? I said, Grandpa told me. What I didn't say yet was everything else. Mr. Aldrich cleared his throat. He removed his reading glasses from his face and set them on the table with the chain pulled beside them. He looked at my brother and said, in his precise, invoiced voice, that he had some concerns he needed to raise before anything was signed. He said he had received a call the previous week from a notary in Columbus who had flagged an irregularity on a document that had been submitted with his office's letterhead. He said the irregularity was significant enough that he had already been in contact with the Ohio bar. My brother's wife picked up her handbag from the floor and placed it in her lap. My brother said, that was a draft document. There was a miscommunication, Mr. Aldrich said. The document included a forged signature line attributed to your grandfather. Your grandfather passed on the 14th. The document was dated the 12th. The room got very quiet. I reached into my bag. I want to tell you something about my grandfather. He taught me that the most important thing you can do in any situation is to be the person who did the work beforehand. He said luck was just preparation dressed up for a party. I thought about him saying that a lot in the weeks between his death and that meeting. I placed him a note envelope on the table. Inside it was a printed copy of the certified will I had retrieved from Mr. Person, Aldrich's office weeks earlier, with the date stamp, with the authorization letter, with Grandpa's original signature across the bottom in his careful, deliberate cursive. Beside it, I laid a printout of the text exchange my brother had sent me the previous Thursday, in which he summarized the equal split and mentioned the folder I should expect at the meeting. And then, last, I placed my phone face up on the table and pressed play on a 3-minute audio clip. It was the dinner. It was my brother's voice, smooth and warm, telling me things about my grandfather's wishes that he had no way of knowing unless he had already been in contact with someone willing to alter documents. It was him saying, twice, that he had handled things with the attorney's office. It was him saying, at one point, that I had always been the sentimental one, and sentiment didn't pay property taxes. He heard himself say that in a quiet room in front of a lawyer, and the color left his face in a way I had never seen before. Not embarrassment, not anger, just the specific white of someone who has finally understood where they actually stand. Becca put her hand on his arm. He didn't look at her. I picked my phone back up. I said, I'm not signing anything today. I'm not going to pretend the next few months were clean or simple, because they weren't. Legal processes are slow. They are boring and expensive, and they grind against grief in ways that feel indecent. My brother retained his own attorney. There were letters. There were counter letters. At one point, his attorney argued that the certified copy I held was itself suspect, which was such a spectacular overreach that even my brother's own accountant, who was deposed later, seemed uncomfortable testifying to it. My grandfather's actual handwriting did what it needed to do in the end. 3 independent forensic document examiners agreed that the signature on my brother's version was inconsistent with known samples. Mr. Aldrich, to his credit, had kept meticulous records going back 15 years. Here is the part that surprised me, not the legal outcome. I knew what the document said. What surprised me was my brother's wife. About 6 weeks into the process, I received a voicemail from Becca. She was speaking quietly, like she was in another room from him. She said she was sorry, not for anything specific, just sorry. She said she had not known about the documents, the real ones, the forged ones, until after the funeral. She said she had found out the same night I had played the recording, when they drove back to the hotel in complete silence and my brother finally explained what had happened. She said she was staying for now, but she wanted me to know she had not been part of it. I believed her. I don't know if I was right to believe her, but I did. I thought about Emma. I thought about people who are pulled into someone else's orbit and spend years rationalizing the gravity before they realize they can walk away. Some of them figure it out. Some of them don't. Becca's path was not mine to decide. I didn't call her back, but I kept the voicemail. The estate settled in my favor 8 months after my grandfather died. The house is mine. The 11 acres are mine. The developer made an offer through their attorney that was, as I had suspected, significantly more than $30,000 for even a partial interest. I haven't accepted it. I'm not sure I'm going to. There is an uneven kitchen floor in that house and a cracked step on the back porch. And some mornings I sit where my grandfather used to sit and I watch the light change over the fields. My brother and I have not spoken. I don't know if we will. People assume that when you win something like this, when the documents are clear and the outcome is fair and justice is technically served, that there is satisfaction on the other side. And there is, a little. But mostly what I feel is the absence of something. Not my brother, not exactly. The version of him I kept hoping would show up, the one who might have called, just once, to say he remembered how Grandpa smelled in summer or the way he laughed at his own jokes before anyone else did. That version never came. What I know is this. I did not go to that conference room to destroy my brother. I went to protect what my grandfather left me. Not just the house, not just the land, but the intention behind it. The recognition that I had been there, that I had shown up, that it had meant something. My grandfather made sure of that, and I made sure his word held. The recorder in my bag cost $40. I bought it at a drugstore 2 towns over on a Tuesday afternoon when I was running errands and trying not to think about whether I was doing the right thing. I still don't know if I was the right kind of person in all of this. I know I was a prepared one. Sometimes that has to be enough. If you were sitting across that table, folder in front of you, pen in someone else's hand, a number at the bottom that was meant to make you feel like you'd gotten something, Would you have signed it, or would you have reached into your bag first? Drop your answer below. And if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Karma keeps better records than any of us expect. I've thought a lot about the word deserve since all of this happened. People use it loosely. He deserves better. She deserves what she got. But what I've come to understand is that deserving has almost nothing to do with what actually happens to you. What happens to you is the result of choices, yours and other people's, layered over years, accumulating quietly the way interest accumulates in an account nobody's checking. My brother made choices. He chose to absent himself from 20 summers. He chose to appear only when there was something to gain. He chose to forge a dead man's signature and hand me a folder with a pen and an expectation. Every one of those choices was a brick he laid himself. And when the structure finally collapsed, it collapsed because of the weight of his own building. I didn't knock it down. I just stood there and let physics do what physics does. I also made choices. I chose to show up year after year, not because I was calculating a return, but because it was the right thing to do, and I knew it, and my grandfather knew it, and somewhere underneath all the entitlement, my brother knew it too. I chose to get that certified copy. I chose to carry a recorder to dinner. Those weren't paranoid acts. They were the acts of someone who had paid attention long enough to understand the pattern and decided, finally, that preparation was not the same thing as distrust. It was just honesty about what I was dealing with. There's a kind of intelligence that doesn't come from school. It comes from watching, from staying quiet when the other person assumes your silence is weakness, from understanding that the most powerful thing you can do in certain moments is simply know more than anyone in the room believes you know. My grandfather had it. He told me once that he never played cards with anyone he hadn't watched play first. I thought he was talking about poker. He wasn't. What I want to say to anyone sitting inside a version of this story, maybe not about inheritance, maybe about something smaller or something much larger, is that your presence has value even when the people around you are refusing to assign it. Especially then, the record of what you did, who you were, how many times you showed up when it was inconvenient. That record exists whether or not anyone acknowledges it. Documents can be forged. Character cannot. And character, in the end, is what holds up under examination. My grandfather built something real because he showed up with his hands and did the work. I don't think it was an accident that he left it to the person who had done the same. That's not luck. That's the long, slow arithmetic of a life lived with integrity, and it always, eventually, balances out.